Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the foXnoMad podcast. I'm your host, foXnoMad Arnold Polat. My guest today is Nicole Phillip. She is a writer and content creator. She wrote an article for the New York Times a couple years back called My Very Personal Taste of Racism Abroad, talking about the racism she faced on her first trip to Europe in Italy. She now has a large social media following where she gives advice and tips to Black travelers and also raises awareness for everybody to sort of understand the differences and some of the prejudice that Black travelers may face. I think you're really going to find this episode very interesting and insightful. I hope you enjoyed this one with Nicole Phillip. There we go. Thanks, Nicole, for taking the time to be on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you. Like I told you before we hit record that I've been trying to sort of get you on the podcast for a while now. So I'm really glad that we were able to make it happen. Um, I guess for everybody listening and watching, maybe you can just give a little background about yourself and then we can go from there.
Yes, so my name is Nicole. I am currently an independent social media strategist and travel influencer or creator, because influencer is kind of an icky word sometimes. So creator, whichever you like to call me. So I started off my career in the journalism industry. So I worked at companies like ABC News, the New York Times. I actually worked on the 1619 project, if you're familiar with that, and also like NBC Universal, until I decided I wanted to get into the world of social media. And I transitioned into focusing on being a travel creator. I want to say toward the top of this year, I was creating in general since about like 2021, but I decided to focus on being a travel creator toward the top of this year. This is some different things aligned where I was able to mutually separate from my last company so that I could pursue similarly to you, and you wanted to pursue travel. I was able to pursue this on a more full-time basis at the top of the year. And what really sparked this desire in me, if I'll backtrack a little bit, was a situation when I traveled abroad for the first time overseas, like across the Atlantic for the first time and studied abroad in Italy. So this time in my life, I'm a 19-year-old college student who has never been to that side of the world, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, went there. And for the first time, I experienced racism like no other. It's things that I did not experience while growing up in the South. So I'm from Florida. So things I had never even experienced growing up in the South is what I had experienced in Italy. That inspired me to write about it in 2018 for the New York Times, which got a huge response that I could never have imagined. I got a response from the mayor of Florence. People were talking about me in tabloids in Italy as I talked about my experience with racism there. And from there, I had always had just in the back of my mind, I really want to create content in some way that can help other Black people, people of color, be better prepared for what they can expect when they travel, right? Because after Italy, once your eyes kind of open, that's kind of it, right? Your eyes are, that's it. You can't unsee things. So I would travel to different places like, Spain, Prague, wherever. And I was paying attention more than in a way that I hadn't been before of how people received me. And I would have situations in which, I was ignored at a restaurant or trying to think of some other ends, like the people not wanting to sit next to me on the train or like waiting until another seat gets up because they don't want to sit next to me as a Black person, things like that. And the stares, that just feeling uncomfortable, unwanted. And I was like, people aren't prepared for this because a lot of the travel narratives that we hear are often told from the lens of white people. When I was studying abroad, all my white friends are like, it's gonna be so great. Like you're gonna eat pizza and ride Vespas and find the love of your life. And I hadn't thought about the fact that their experience would be different because they don't look like me. And so I decided around 2021, I started creating that. I was just doing commentary in general, like on TikTok. And then toward the end of last year, I started doing my travel reviews. I had always felt very passionately about Italy. I noticed when I talked about my experience, those videos did very well. So I decided I want to start doing travel reviews from my past experiences to, again, tell Black people and people of color what they can expect based on my own experience or what they might expect based on my own experiences. And I was overwhelmed by the response. And now it's something that I have continued and it's been well received. I was asked to write an essay for the Today Show based on these reviews that I do. So I'm happy to see that people are appreciative of the work that I'm doing. And it helps me to know that what I'm doing is helpful. And that's where I'm at now, just continuing to do that and traveling.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up Italy. I was just there. I was working on a project involving immigration. I don't think I say more yet. But I was really surprised at the reactions that I got from people about just, immigrants or foreigners or outsiders. I was really surprised at the reaction. I guess I was expecting something different, maybe. And so, when I first saw, your review, from Italy, and I read the article, and I said, that is, for me, I blend in so much there, right? So I feel like I was like, whoa, I had never thought about how different this experience could be if I looked different. I mean, this seems stupid to say, but it just never occurred to me. So for the people who are listening and, uh, who might not be able to understand that, like, how different was the experience for you? And what are some of the things that you faced?
So yeah, as you're saying this, it does hit on that important point that I just mentioned that things are very different. So you probably blend in Italy. You're not
Mhm.
Italian. You probably blend in, look a lot more like the people around you. So what happens when a Black person from any country goes to Italy is that you become from what I have gathered, a victim of the cross section of racism and xenophobia. So they do have a lot of people who have immigrated there from African countries, and xenophobia and racism often go hand in hand. And so they have this very, very negative sentiment toward immigration and toward Black people because these things go hand in hand. And no matter where you're from, you do receive a lot of that negative sentiment. So things that happened to me to move forward with this point at a point when I was in Cinque Terre, I remember I was on a beach hanging out with a few of my friends. Most of them were white. There was one other, I think one was mixed, another Black girl, Indian. She was Indian, and white. And then there was a Black girl. There's a guy on the beach. He's here and he's trying to flirt with these girls on the beach with, that were next to us or with us, sorry. And it was unsuccessful. They were not interested in talking to this man. They kind of blew him off, whatever, like, don't talk to us, whatever. So at some point he just gets really frustrated, I guess, with the girls. He starts talking trash to them now because he's just upset. Like when unfortunately as women, when you turn a guy down, it goes from, oh, I love you, you're so cute, to now you're trash and I hate you and blah blah blah. So one of the Black women in our group, so it was me and one other, she goes up and she tells the man, like, hey, don't talk to women that way. You should not talk to women that way. So at a point, he then grabs her, he's manhandling her, he's shaking her around. And when I say this is a tiny woman, her frame is very small. And this was a grown man, probably maybe a 5'10" or whatever on the beach. He is really shaking her around like a rag doll. The white like girls behind me, the mixed girl, everyone does nothing. They're just standing there staring. So then I go up and I'm like trying to defend her. Hey, get off of her. And then at one point I had to punch him in the arm for him to let her go. At that moment, when there's just so much chaos going on, you're not like really paying attention to anything beyond like what's right in front of you. That's when I looked around and I see all these people around me, and I'm like, all these people are just here staring. Not a single person getting up to help. Not a single person saying anything, moving, nothing. Just they're watching this man manhandle this woman like it was nothing. And I at some point you probably see this in the essay that I wrote for the New York Times, where I lock eyes with someone who appeared to be perhaps an African migrant. He was selling things on the beach, and we lock eyes, and he's just staring at me, and it's like I really felt that, I wish I could help you. That look of like I wish I could do something, But I know the consequences of him jumping in are probably far worse than me as, with my American passport and I can get on out of here. You know what I'm saying? So as we now walk away, he's let her go. We're now walking away. I feel something really cold just hit the back of my body. So does the other girl. And then we turn around, we get splashed in the face. This man is now hurling beer at us, as I guess in his frustration as we're walking away. I can't remember if we had said anything else at that point, but at this point, like it's getting out of hand now. Like he's
Mhm.
assaulted us, he's throwing beer, like, so we start walking away, and then the one of the girls with us, she turns around to us and she goes, "Did you hear what he just said? He called you disgusting black women." And it's so wild because we had nothing to do with why he was rejected. We had nothing to do with the beginning situation. You know what I'm saying? So meanwhile, we're getting beer thrown at us. This girl's getting dragged around for defending these
Mhm.
white girls who did nothing to jump in. You know what I'm saying? And then we're bearing the brunt of that, being called disgusting black women because what he wanted to do to those girls he couldn't do. So he did it to us because, as I just explained, everyone on the beach is staring. They're not going to do anything. He can do whatever he wants. He knew that.
And
And so, I'm sorry.
yeah, no, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, and if the roles were reversed, if he was doing that to your friends, you think people would have jumped in and stopped it? Do you? Mhm.
Oh, 100%. I do believe that more people would have jumped in and stopped it. Someone would have said something. And I say this because there's more than the bystander effect at play. There's also the stereotypes of black woman masculinity. Black women we are not given the same perception of femininity as white women and other women. The stereotypes of you're aggressive, you're this, you're that, you're masculine, all of these different things and stereotypes that are put on black women. We don't get that same damsel in distress sort of look. People don't look at us as like it's more like either, they got it or like this is two men fighting. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Because of the masculine stereotypes. They look at it almost like that. We don't get that soft, she needs help sort of I guess view from society as these white girls would have gotten or other women in general would tend to get. So I 100% think that if he had pulled that with some of those other girls, other people would have said something. Someone would have seen their femininity, they need to be protected. But and you've probably seen this kind of conversation come up in other narratives. Black women are often unprotected. There's a famous quote from Malcolm X: "The most disrespected woman in America is the black woman." You know what I'm saying? Black women are often unprotected. So, and if that's in America where they've had black people for hundreds of years, and imagine what in Italy when immigration is more of a recent thing for them.
Yeah, I mean that's like hard to sort of like for me to just download into my brain that something like that could happen. Um, and it's definitely happened more than once, right? Incidents like that where you run into these situations that would be totally different if the color of your skin were different or if you were maybe a man or something like that, right? I mean this.
Yeah, yeah. Because and I want people to also understand, like when we talk about like the things that happened to me in Italy, because that is just one incident. I went into this bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, like sheltered Orlando girl. Never, I don't, I've never, quote unquote, never experienced racism. Like I don't, like this sheltered life that I had lived. Because remember, this is my first time also going overseas. My eyes were not open to the realities of life at this point. My
Mhm.
mother had very much sheltered me, and in her way, she did what she thought was best to protect me, right? So I had never really experienced any of this. So I wasn't going to Italy looking like, "Okay, where's the racism? Let me find it." You know
Mhm.
what I'm saying? 'Cause people often are like, "Oh, well, if you're looking for racism, you'll find it." I'm like, I was a 19-year-old girl just trying to be abroad and and have the fun that all the other people have when they go to Italy. And then these things were just happening to me. You know what I'm saying? That's the first time I'd
Mhm.
ever been called a disgusting black woman. I don't think since then, I don't think I've ever been called anything like a slur outside the internet because the internet's a terrible place. Like you know, in person. I remember there was another incident where I'm walking down the street in Italy. It's broad daylight. Shop owners are outside sweeping their sidewalks, putting out their signs, and I'm walking behind a woman, looking down, looking at my phone. She turns around, sees my face, screams as if I was about to mug her. She screams. And now I'm looking around like, oh my gosh, what is going on? Jumps off the sidewalk, hides behind a car, screams again, staring at me, and I'm like, I don't. Even shop owners are looking at me. I'm like, I don't understand. I don't get it. Why are you so afraid of me? But then as I understand more and my eyes are opening more, I understand why she was so afraid of me. Because as we all know, there is also like perceptions of fear surrounding like Black bodies and Black people. And so that's like another incident. And again, these are not things like that I was experiencing, at least as a child or, growing up in the United States. So this is all like very new to me to understand. Like, I've read about these things. I know these things do happen. I know people, people do get afraid of Black people and they cross the street, things like that. They clutch their bag, things like that. But it was happening and I'm seeing it with my own eyes now. I remember asking people for directions. So at this time, I spoke pretty good Italian. Like my Italian's very basic now, but this time I spoke pretty good Italian. I'd ask people for directions. The one incident tried to ask people for directions on a bus because I was going in the wrong direction. And like, I have pretty decent Italian pronunciation. Like people, like at least back then, everyone's ignoring me. Adults are ignoring me. I have to ask a child. And then the child is the one who, like, the child was probably like 10, and the child gives me directions because everyone else is turning their nose up at me and refused to say a single word to me, you
And
know?
yeah, and as these things are happening to you, it's your first time abroad, first time in Italy. Like, how is what happens to you? Like, how do you start to, I mean, I would just imagine that you might like shelter down. I mean, it must just totally ruin the experience, but then like, how do you go through like, the things that you had on your itinerary to see or do? Like, what starts happening to your travel experience at that point?
So, like I said, I went into it bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, like life is good. I'm gonna have the same experience as everyone else around me. I want to say it was breaking me down as the person that I was then at 19 years old. It really was breaking me down. I remember at a point I was at some club somewhere and like people didn't even want to like be near me. And at a point I just sat down on a chair and I started crying. And I very distinctly remember that. Like that, I think that was like the final moment for me. I'm like, people were acting like I was like diseased, you know? Like if I dance too close
Mhm.
to a guy, oh, he's disgusted. He'll dance with all the white girls, but like as soon as I come close, like, oh no. You know what I'm saying? And then I was like, oh wow, I'm disgusting to these people here. Like they don't actually even want to be near me. And I sat on that couch and cried. I remember that. And I can't remember like where the club was. Probably I think it was in Florence, but yeah. And then I remember just having this feeling of, just being unwanted. I would still try to have fun. So I was still going to, traveling up and down Italy and going to different places, Rome, Perugia for the chocolate festival and things like that. I remember getting a very strange caricature done in Perugia, though, where the guy kept saying that my lips looked like a tomato, which is like very racially encoded. And it was just a very strange thing to be saying. And, my dumb self still sat for the caricature because I'm like, and then everyone's looking around and laughing, and I'm not quite sure what's happening. And then he draws this like very, like obviously characters are supposed to be exaggerated, but it was just like the way in which he did my lips in a very like minstrelly like type of way, in my opinion. That all my like everyone around me is like laughing. Even my friends, I had a couple friends, they weren't laughing, but they were like, "Oh my God." Like that was their expression in the background. I'm looking at them like, "Oh shit." Like, sorry, cursing. I'm like, "Oh my goodness, like what's happening?" And so yeah. So just like seeing those sorts of things. I don't know if I ever got to a point in Italy where I was like, screw it, I'm just gonna have a good time no matter what. I was young, this is the first time any of these things are happening to me. The first time I realized that life and would be different, like this different for me as a Black woman, because again my mom just really tried to shelter me from this. I should also mention that my mom she's not from the United States, so my mother is she immigrated from the United States. So the type of conversations that people who are generational Black Americans get, I did not get. So generational Americans get often the conversations about life is going to be different for you. This is how handle the cops, things like that. I didn't get that because that wasn't like a part of my generation upon generation conversations that families have. So, and then my mother, obviously, she had experienced racism, she understood racism existed, but she didn't have any sort of precedent to be
Mhm.
like, here's how I teach my daughter about racism. So the best she knew was like, I'm not gonna poison her mind with the world is an awful place for you. You know what I'm saying? So, so I really had no tools I had no
Hmm.
tools to handle this. And how the treatment, the stares, again, that was just one instance of me asking for directions in other situations, and people again turning their nose up at me. Remember, there was a time when I asked for directions. This was my last night in Italy. I was trying to meet my friends somewhere, and that's my first time meeting like decent, nice Italians, by the way. So I was at a get together for some with some decent, nice Italians. But I think maybe the difference was that they had studied in international school in like England, so they were able to get out of Italy and be in a more diverse place and things like that. Had a pretty decent time. It was really lovely. These people were so kind. I left because I was going to go to a bar with my friends and meet up with them. I had run out of all the minutes on my phone because this is back when you had those pay-as-you-go phones that you would use when you traveled instead of just
Hmm.
having your digital SIM swap or whatever. And so I'm asking for directions. People are turning their nose up again, and I go to this couple. They're walking in the streets, a man and a woman, and I say, what is it? Like, perdone, dove il-" like, that means like, where's the bar? And like the name of the bar. And I remember the guy grabs the girl and like pulls her behind. And like, he's like, you know, like he's
Hmm.
protecting her. Mind you, it's cold. I'm in a sweater. I have like just a skull cap on and a sweater. I have like like I guess similar glasses to this, maybe black rimmed. Like nothing about me is intimidating except for that I'm black, I guess. There's just like no reason for me, especially there's a lot of people around. It's not a dark alley either,
Hmm.
you know? So for him to pull her behind and then he's like, no, we don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like
Hmm.
it was just things like that I just it really it's kind of like what death by a thousand cuts.
Hmm.
You have like the big situations with the being called disgusting black woman, the woman jumping off the sidewalk, but then there's these other smaller situations, which again is like I said, death by a thousand cuts. And I was kind of like, well, is it just me? Because I had a couple friends who were staying in Rome and apparently had the best time of their lives. And one of them got married, has two kids now with an Italian man that she met. So I'm like, well, was this just me? But as I got my story out there, I realized it's not just me. I would say if we were to take a poll, probably like 40 to 50% of Black people, and from what I've also noticed, Asian people who travel to Italy probably have very similar experiences, you know?
Uh, Yeah, I mean, did you notice like a age gap where older people meaner, maybe young people more open-minded, or was it kind of, across the board?
The instances that I can remember would be pretty much across the board. The guy on the beach was probably in his 30s, you
Hmm.
know. The couple was a young couple. A lot of people that had ignored me were young. I remember the particular person that ignored me on the bus for that one instant was an older man, like old. Um, the one kind person was the child that might have been 10 years old. And, and I don't say this to say like there are no nice people in Italy, because obviously other people met them,
Hmm.
like the other 50% of people clearly met them. And I was at that dinner with some very kind people. But when you have such an insidious culture of xenophobia and racism that's been allowed to fester through, different far right leaning politicians and ideologies and things like that over time, it permeates just such a wide swath of your society, you know, that it does become very hard to find the people who aren't like that.
Hmm.
At least it was for me. And even since then, I've still met some very kind people from Italy, but it just becomes very difficult. I can tell you right now, I have no desire to ever go back to Italy. I've been once before, but that was for the wedding for the same person I just told
Hmm.
you about, found her husband in Italy. But I have like no strong desire to go back just because Italy left an indelible mark on me, and I would not trade the experience only because it led me to who I am now. And
Hmm.
that would be the only reason, we're all made up of good and bad experiences. If not for Italy, it would not have opened my eyes in the way that it did to the injustice of in the world, and just how different things could be. Maybe something else would have opened my eyes, but I know that this Italy experience did. And so I don't necessarily regret it. I guess it's a thing that needed to happen in my life for me to opened my eyes and things could have been much worse. Thank God they weren't. Um, but I don't have like a strong, other people are like, I'm gonna go to, the Amalfi Coast and whatever and do that. And I'm like, keep your Amalfi Coast. I'm like, I'm good.
And it's your first trip, right, abroad. And so you go through these experiences. Do you then go, I don't want to see anywhere else? Or do you go, I need to see other places and have a good experience? You know what I mean? Like, do you feel like, okay, I need to sort of balance this out with some place or some experience that I feel good about? Or do you just go, this has really put me off to travel. It's going to take a lot for me to get back to see more of the world.
So, there's just one point of clarification. This
Hmm.
wasn't my first time abroad. I had gone to like the Caribbean before,
Hmm.
but this is my first time like crossing the Atlantic over to,
Okay.
the Europe. So, but yeah, so actually, you would think that maybe for other people, perhaps that would be the case where they were just like, I don't want to travel anymore. I'm so over this. But if anything, that study abroad experience still ignited that travel flame,
Hmm.
it bit with the travel bug. Because, as you know, these countries in Europe are so close to each other. So for the first time, like, yeah, I'm in Italy, but now I'm visiting um what Paris for the first time. I'm going to Spain. I'm in Barcelona for the very first time. So I went to Manchester. So like for the like I go from never having crossed over to now I've been to 4 different countries, and I thought it was really cool. And another thing about this whole experience, because a lot of what I do is also centered around solo travel, is I went to NYU. A lot of the kids around me are rich. They can afford to do, more expensive travel and all of that while we're studying abroad. I was stuck with Ryanair. Whatever I could afford for $20 on Ryanair. And my Ryanair budget did not meet my NYU friends budget. So I
Hmm.
had to do my own thing. While they are able to spend a couple $100s to go XYZ place on in a nice train car or whatever. I'm like, well, Ryanair's $20. That's what I have. That's where I'm gonna go. I'm gonna take the 5 a.m. train that costs $14 so I can get to the airport. And then I just had the thrill of the independence at that point of being able to like go to these different countries. I guess I'm a little bit of like a calculated risk taker, so I was like, all right, well, I mean, like I came here by myself, I didn't know anyone before I decided to study abroad in Italy, so I'm like, oh, let's try Spain. I went to Barcelona and I met like a really cool group of Americans in Barcelona that like I and maintained. They actually lived in Florence, which was interesting. That's where I was studying abroad. Met them in Barcelona. And this was like during fall break. So like this was a fall semester, yeah, fall semester. So in October, I met them. That really did help my Italy experience
Hmm.
because now I had friends, like real friends, not friends that are going to stand there while you get called a disgusting black woman and have beer poured on you. So now I had new friends, and that really helped me to not completely hate my time.
Hmm.
And I was hanging out with them all the time, and they were super cool, and it was really nice. And we maintained contact for a few years after that. I visited other friends I visited a friend in Paris, went on my own to Manchester, and I think I just loved that independence, that feeling of being able to just do my thing. And the fact that also it was kind of easy, like I feel like all airports kind of work the same, even if you don't speak the language, like you can figure it out, and I like that.
Hmm. Yeah, and so that's good in the sense that like it didn't take away that desire to travel and see the world. You know, but now like as you're saying this makes me think like when I before I go to a place, I tend to research a couple of things like where to stay, what's the crime like, what's the bad neighborhoods, just kind of like just basic stuff so I don't get into trouble immediately when I'm there. Do you have an additional layer of research that you have to do now when you go to a place or that you do because you're like, I need to find out like how what I might encounter, if there's like prejudice or racism that specific like that I have to worry about and maybe how to handle it. Is yeah.
Well, there are definitely certain places that are like probably universally we know will probably be a little hostile toward Black people, like, but for me, and I say this to people all the time, If I let racism stop me from traveling, I would go absolutely nowhere because there is racism in my favorite country. And I tell people all the time, oh, I love Colombia. I love Colombia. They got racism there too. And I just went to Cali and experienced that firsthand for the first time after two other visits to Colombia. Right. And so I do, the research that everyone else does, as well as like, let me see if there's any major incidents of, racism going on in this country and things like that. But in the end of the day, I don't think, and I said this before as well, and I'll say it here on the podcast, I'll say anti-Black racism is global. I don't think there is a country, perhaps outside of the continent of Africa, and then you still got South Africa in there and then North Africa that are different. But outside of the continent of Africa, where there isn't some sort of anti-Black prejudice. You know what I'm saying? Some places are going to be better than others. Like you're going to feel more comfortable in some places than others. But I don't think that any place is untouched by even if it's I didn't experience it myself. I'll talk about it online and the other people will be like, well, this is what I experienced, And also, even if you were, and some people say, well, why don't you just travel to Black countries, Nicole? Stop traveling to those white. I get this a lot. Stop traveling to those non-Black countries. That's your problem. Stop traveling to non-Black countries. First of all, again, I'm not going to let racism stop me from seeing the world. Just like I did in Italy at 19, and I had every reason to say screw travel. I'm not going to let racism stop me from using what decades I have left on this earth to see the world. The other thing is, no matter where you go, not only will you potentially encounter anti-Black racism beyond Black countries, there's also anti-Black American sentiment. Now, I told you my mother is immigrated. She's from Trinidad, so she immigrated here. I am still seen as a Black American. I read as a Black American. I identify as Black American. I am not a generational Black American, so I don't have the same connection to the history of the fight and triumph of Black Americans here in this country, and I like to make sure that's very clear. But culturally, and how I am viewed, and how present myself, I am a Black American. When I go to Jamaica, they don't see, oh yeah, her mother's from Trinidad. No, I'm a Black American. They treat me as such. And while there's Black racism, there's also anti-Black American sentiment that is layered in that as part of just the larger fabric of white supremacy and the patriarchy that puts the diaspora, members of the diaspora together. I mean, against each other, sorry. That puts the members of the diaspora against each other. And so that's why I tell people, I'm like, okay, so then I'll go to West Africa, and then there's potential for still anti-Black American sentiment there because people I have not yet myself been there, but like I've read about the anti-Black American sentiment in the Caribbean and in West Africa. There's also colorism. That's why people skin bleach in the Caribbean and parts of Africa. And so it's like in different countries in Africa. And I'm a dark-skinned woman. You know what I'm saying? So then there's potential for me to receive prejudice because of that, the being dark, being Black American and being dark. You know what I'm saying? So I'm like, there's always going to be something. As long as I walk this earth as a dark-skinned Black woman with locks in my head, there will always be something. And so I don't let any of it stop me. Even if I did Google something and about a country and saw, they have had a few racist incidents, unless it was like, Black people beware, like do not come here at all. Like it's one of those sort of situations. That's a different story. I'm not stupid. I will not walk into the lion's den. You know what I'm saying? But there was something here. They have a far right leader like Hungary. I've been to Hungary, even though their prime minister has had said some negative comments regarding immigration and things like that. I still went to Hungary and I still had a decent time. I actually didn't have any problems when I was in Budapest specifically. And I actually didn't have any problems. So unless like it's major red flags everywhere, I try not to let that racism stop me from experiencing because of the color of my skin. Like because of the color of my skin, I shouldn't see the Eiffel Tower.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like I shouldn't be able to experience what everyone else gets to experience because I need to hide now and only go to Black countries where I could still have an issue, but at least I'm in a black country. You know what I'm saying? But I also want to, make it clear like there's still so much. This is not again. There's nothing against going to black countries, the Caribbean and places and countries in Africa or anything like that. Like I do have a desire to experience those as well. But what I'm saying is I want to experience the full breadth of the world. I want to be able to travel anywhere.
Yeah, but I mean, like everybody else, right? Like you want to go to the places that you find interesting, whatever that happens to be, right? So are there tips or advice that you give? I know you give a lot through social media, but like if you had a couple of tips for people, if black or people of color who are traveling and say, here's a little something you should know. Is it destination specific, or do you have sort of a general, like if you were going to give like a quick tip, or is it just be aware of what you could potentially face?
I think my general tip is always be aware of the potential the like of having a negative experience. Even like Italy. Like I don't tell people don't go to Italy. I said just be aware of the potential for the negative experiences that you can expect because I think being aware prepares you far better than I was when I went to Italy, Simply being aware that these things can happen so that your whole trip is not derailed. You know what I'm saying? So that
Mhm.
you don't get beaten down the way I was beaten down. And so that awareness of what to expect. Also researching and doing your research. One thing I didn't do when I went before I went to Italy was my own due diligence, like with research. But and I've gotten some backlash with regarding that. I do like to remind people I was 19
Mhm, mhm.
in college, and I would have thought that if I was going to a blatantly racist country, NYU would have told me, So you do have some trust in your school and you hope that they're gonna look out for you, but just like it's kind of look at it like booking with a tour group or an agency. They're probably going to make sure that you don't get harmed physically, maybe, or killed, but you got to do your own research and look into like what to expect. But as I just mentioned, I think that anti-blackness is global and there's not a country on this earth that does not um and like I said, outside of perhaps the Caribbean and countries in Africa, that does not have to some extent, even if it's just like their own preconceived notions and stereotypes about Black people. Like, I mean, look at China. There was once a commercial where they put a Black man in a washing machine and he came out and he was white or he was Asian. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, places that don't even have Black people still have their own racist thoughts about Black people. Like, that
Mhm.
they don't really interact with Black people on a daily basis, but they still have their racist thoughts. And, that's another thing I always tell people about, because another thing that people come up say a lot is, well, people are asking you for pictures, they're staring at you. All these things are because they just don't have Black people. But I'm like, you like again with that China example, they don't have to have Black people to be racist, like be racist.
Mhm.
That's not a prerequisite to racism, right? And at the same time, a lot of these countries, like you see that happens in like places like India and things like that. A lot of these countries do have their own, whether it was influenced by white supremacy or on their own preferences for whiter skin. There is already colorism built in. So not only are you not here, you're here, not just like a darker version of them. You black, like you are black, not just a darker version of them. You are black, And so those come with their own negative sentiments. In India, they have their own derogatory terms specifically for Black people of African descent. In India, it's not about just being, dark-skinned Indian, whatever. Those terms. There's words specifically, and that word is so apparently that word is so disgusting that when I wanted to have it published in one of the publications that I was working for, because someone was kind of sharing their sentiments about like, oh, when I grew up in India, these are the words I would hear, whatever. And the Indian people at the place that I worked were like, no, that word is so vile. We cannot have that. We cannot use that word. And so I'm like, that's how disgusting and low down and dirty that word is that people use for Black people in India. You know what I'm saying? Like it's worse than being just a dark skinned Indian person almost to have that. And at least that's how I view it,
Mhm.
you know? And so, and then I remember doing a video at one point where I was like, here are all the derogatory terms for Black people in all of these different countries, just so you're aware when you travel. And there's so many. A lot of them also were Spanish words as well from Latin America, but there was like, um, there were Italian words. I think there might have been some Syrian words. I can't remember, but like from just all around, all these different words specifically for Black people. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so even if I have not myself gone to this country and experienced it, like maybe I went and I had a great time, you know what I'm saying? It does not, it's not lost on me that other people might experience what I didn't, like, some sort of racism because I get it. It's global.
Mm-hmm. And you're definitely raising awareness about it. I think it's something that, like I said, a lot of people don't think about, or at least I don't, didn't think about. And I think like having awareness is good. If you could change something, like if you could go, this is maybe something, whether it's travel related or just generally to help. Like if you had a magic, crystal ball, you can be like, I could make this thing come true. Is there something? It is sort of a big, complicated question. I
Yeah,
know,
I'm like,
like,
like if I could change one thing in the
one,
world at all.
obviously get rid of racism, right? Like just
Yeah,
snap
that's
your
enough
fingers.
to away with that. So like specifically to travel related to travel or
Yeah, like I don't know. Is yeah, something I'm thinking of something very stupid, like even in the State Department, like travel warnings. They maybe have a separate section for these kind of things. Like I don't know. I mean, that's maybe silly, but
Mhm.
or
Yeah, I do. I am not sure if that would be something that would be implemented in in the State Department. I'm not sure like the likelihood of that something like that actually being implemented within the State Department. And I also don't know how many people realize that they should read those. I'm not gonna lie, the travel advisors,
yeah.
unfortunately. Um, I I guess I just wish that people would not let and I guess this is reiterating a thing that I said earlier, but people would not let the fear of racism stop them from seeing things, And because I do see a lot of people saying, this is why I don't, this is why I don't leave the country. This is why I stay home. I don't even have a passport because of this, and that. And I'm like, no, no, that's not what I'm saying this for. Like, that's not why I did this video. That's not the point here. I want you to travel. I just want you to be prepared. I want you to be better prepared than I was. I want you to understand that the movies and things that we see, they're told through white lenses. You know what I'm saying? I always make this reference that when I was going to Italy at the time, one of the more popular videos for my movies, sorry, for my generation regarding Italy was the Lizzie McGuire movie. And she had all this fun in, the Disney Channel movie. She had all this fun in Italy and there are Vespas involved. And I'm like, and I always tell people like, that's what I was thinking my life would be. Like I'm fresh out of high school, basically. I'm 19. And I'm just like, I don't know. Sorry, I actually believe I might have been 20. It doesn't, I mean, something like that, 19 or 20. Either way, I'm basically fresh out of high school. I've only been in college for like a year. You know what I'm saying? So I'm thinking that's what life is. Like that's what life
Mhm.
in Italy is. Because that's also like, if you think about it, that's what all the media tells us, isn't it? Like unless you're watching like the news of what's really happening, but if you're just watching like movies and TV, that's Italy, right? It's cappuccinos and romance and love and pizza and that's what it is. But that's not the reality.
Mhm.
And I want people to understand that, but not be afraid of it. I mean, Italy's still at the bottom of my travel list, so I'm not gonna like ever put that at the top of it. Like if you should definitely go here, but still don't be afraid because at the end of the day, I've gone to Italy. You
Mhm.
know, at the end of the day, I've traveled up and down the country, so like I can say, oh, I'm not gonna go back if I want. Like if I decided to really never go back, I can say that I've been there. But to like never have experience seeing like letting racism stop you from seeing the Colosseum, just I mean, honestly, Italian food. I really love Italian food. I say that. I'm like, I'll say a lot of bad things about, but the food, I do love the food. I love a warm Nutella croissant,
Mhm.
like I love the Napolitano pizza. Like I mean, you're not gonna try that in Italy. Like Italy kind of like spoiled me on like on food, like in the way of like food should be done. I'm not gonna lie. I got back and I was like, I'm only eating arugula with olive oil and salt for my salads. Like, what is this, tomato on my salad? No. I'm like, um, but yeah, but I'm like, but I can say, oh, I'm good off of going to Italy because I've already been. So other people should, and I'm not gonna say other people should go and then they have a bad experience and then it's on me,
Mhm.
but they should just open themselves to travel and having their own experiences and just being aware of what could happen and how you'll respond, you
Mhm.
know? Because now that I know, because it's not like the incident stopped happening with Italy, right? I've been followed in like a store in Mexico because it also does not just happen in white countries. Like I told you, like anti-blackness is global, you know. Um, People stare at me, ask me for not just me, but like people that I'm with asking for photos, things like that. And the whole photos thing is also just another thing that really irks me about the photos because I'm like, I'm not a spectacle.
Mhm.
I didn't go on vacation to be treated like I'm on display at a zoo, you know? And because of people's bodily autonomy and understanding that they're not here to put on a show, when I see someone, and I tell people this often too, I don't often see Maori people. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
Mhm.
Maori people. I don't often see them. But if I saw someone and I live in Orlando at Disney, I'm not going to ask them for a photo. They came here to enjoy Disney. They did not come here to be my cultural, social, like, I don't know, on display, whatever, science trip, field trip, whatever, anthropology museum field trip. You
Mhm.
know what I'm saying? Destination. They're here to enjoy themselves. And like, there is precedent for human zoos in which Black people were put into for that very thing, to be stared at, to be gawked at, to be laughed at. You know what I'm saying? And when people are asking for photos, also it's like, what are you doing with that photo? Is it going in the WhatsApp group chat so everybody can laugh at me? Like, what's going on? What's happening with that photo? Other people will pose for that photo, but I'm like, I refuse to believe that a country with the history of anti-blackness, like Mexico, I will say, because they did not even acknowledge Black people on their census until 2016, even though they have a population of Black people in Mexico, they did not even acknowledge their existence on a census until 2016. I refuse to believe that a country with a history of anti-blackness anywhere around the world, the people just simply love me so much and I walked in there and now they want a picture of me. Any of us. I refuse to believe that. They're putting Black people in washing machines in China, and you mean and coming out clean and Asian, and you mean to tell me because my Black behind showed up in China now, they just love Black people and just want a picture of me because I'm so great? They changed their whole mindset on that because someone sat in a marketing room and said all the people in China, this is gonna sell with everybody.
Mhm.
We did our focus groups and this is going to sell. They knew who they were marketing to and that it was going to be fine. It was when it reached internationally that it was no longer fine. But you know what I'm saying? So I'm like, you mean I would never try to delude myself into thinking that I'm just going to be that one Black person that changed everything and that's why they want this picture of me when I walked into this country. So I always say no to photos because I also refuse to show up, like, whether I know it or not, in somebody's group chat being made fun of, being on someone's phone so they can be like, look, I saw a Black person today, like the way you would go to the zoo and take a picture of a bear, to keep on your phone. I refuse. Now that's a tangent, but that's like just another facet of traveling while Black. So I wanted to make sure that I shared that.
No, I mean that's something I never thought about, but it's also it's weird to ask a stranger for a photo, right? Like that just seems, I think, pretty much around the world. Maybe there's certain situations where that might, I don't know, it's just weird to be like, "Hey, can I take a picture of you?" Like, what? You right? Like it doesn't.
Because no one's ever asked you to take a picture of you, right?
Yeah, no, there was one time in India. I'll give you this story
Mhm.
where in India, if you go to certain places, a lot of the locals want to take pictures with blonde people. So the
Mhm.
whiter you are, they want to take pictures. But and so I'm there with some friends. But for me, they were like, "No, you're not you're not
You're
blonde. You
not
look
cool
too
enough.
much like, yeah, you're we don't want you in the picture." I was like, "Oh, okay, all right, I see what And so like you know, but it is, yeah. But nobody ever asked me to take a random picture. I would find that so weird, so strange, right?
Find that so weird. And then even so, that's another thing that people bring up. Oh, people take pictures of white people too, and things like that. But I'm like, as we just talked about the caste system, black people have their own, and black people have their own, or they give black people their own negative slur in India. There's a difference between having your photo requested or taken because you are their standard of beauty,
Mhm,
white skin, blonde hair, this standard of beauty, and having your picture requested because you are a spectacle, because you are an anomaly, you are an alien.
mhm.
Not even their standard of beauty, then they want a photo of you. Something should go off in your head that there's something weird about that. You know what I'm saying? There's two different, like the context is completely different. When you go to
Yeah.
China too, context is completely different as to why a black person might be have a photo request versus a white person or a white blonde person. Especially given, white supremacy around the world. But remember, the sun never sets on the British Empire. Like there was they taken over a lot. You know what I'm saying? So, and then their influence still remains in the minds of what is the quote unquote, the Eurocentric standard of beauty and things.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm really glad we had this discussion because it's so many things that I haven't thought about or in that context. I think a lot of people listening and watching probably haven't either. But also for people who are black or people of color, I'm sure if they've traveled, they've had experiences, and if they haven't, you know, these are some good things to know about, right? So they're not like you said, going in like you did with just completely unaware sort of naivete, and then having all these things happen, and having to learn on the fly how to deal with that stuff, right? So um I really appreciate your time. I I mean, I wish we could just talk about, just travel, a little bit, and just talk about just like food and things like that, because yeah, I will agree with you that Italian food and sort of the culture around food is just kind of pretty amazing, right? Like having just been there, I was like, oh, the courses and everything. I don't know. Anyway, maybe at another podcast we can do
Yeah,
that.
another episode because yeah, there's a lot of meat to this one, so maybe next time.
Where are all the places that people can find you if they want to find you on socials and everywhere else?
Yes, so if you are looking for me on social, I am on TikTok and Instagram at @Nicole Phillip, Phillip. And you can also find me on YouTube, which I just started trying to grow my YouTube presence. So please hit that follow or subscribe button. It's also the same at Nicole Phillip. So Philip, and that is where you'll find me.
Thanks again. I'll leave links in the show notes where everybody can find you, and hopefully people will check you out, subscribe, follow, and all that. 'Cause you have a lot of great information, and I'm a big fan of your writing and all of that. So thank you again so much.
Awesome. I'm happy to help and thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, Nicole, for being a guest on the podcast, and thank all of you for listening. Make sure you give this podcast a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcast. And if you're on YouTube, make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons. I'll have new podcast episodes for you coming out on a regular basis. Thanks again for watching. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.